Today, I want to talk to you about Larry Elder and the recall of the governor in California, which is going to happen in a couple of weeks, the vote. The first thing to point out is that this is a totally unfair process. So there's two questions that they're going to ask. One is whether you support the recall of Governor Newsom. If over 50% of the people say yes, then he is out. And then the second question is, who do you support? And there'll be a list of something like 40 candidates. And what's important to realize is that the person who gets the most votes out of those 40 candidates or so becomes governor. So someone could win with 10% or even less of the vote. So the front runner right now is Larry Elder, who is a talk show host in Southern California. And he's famous for many different stance. One is he's argued that the reason why Democrats do well in California is because of female voters, and that he argues that women know less than men about political issues, economics, and current events. That's actually a quote from Larry Elder. So we're going to look into his mindset, and I'm going to give some psychoanalytic explanations for his positions. So one thing to point out is that as a talk show host, his discourse is often centered on provoking people, and he shows a real insensitivity towards others, especially to people who are disadvantaged in the state. And it's important to remember that California has the highest rate of poverty in the country, and that Larry Elder is part of the right-wing backlash against democratic politics in general, but in particular against left-wing politics. So one thing that he's argued is that the minimum wage should be 0, 0, 0. In other words, there should be no minimum wage, which sounds a lot like slavery or something close to it. So his discourse, as we'll see, is full of hyperbole, exaggeration. And underlying a lot of the current right-wing discourse is this fundamental fantasy, which is that basically that people should, the ultimate value is freedom. And there is this connection made between the free market, free speech, and the free individual. And so instead of seeing the free market as an organized system of economic exchange, they see it as representing this total freedom of the individual. And the same thing with free speech. One reason why there is this backlash against political correctness and what they see as the liberal or the left-wing superego is this focus on the isolated individual and the individual's right for enjoyment and freedom. And here we see this connection between the libertarian, one who wants to be liberated, and the libertine, one who wants to be able to enjoy everyone and everything according to their own desires. And the flip side is that this liberation of this freedom is the freedom to starve. And driving this is the general right-wing anti-government discourse, and which is in part based on against any type of regulation, but was really originally led by a tax revolt. So Proposition 13 was voted 40 years ago in California and really led the drive for this attack on government and this promotion of the free market as the ultimate value. But underlying this is really the issue of wealthy people not wanting to pay a lot of taxes. And the reason why they can justify not paying taxes is by saying that we don't need so much government, especially we don't need welfare. And the reason why we don't need welfare is because we no longer have prejudice or discrimination or racism. And so these two things are connected together, the promotion of the free market and the underlying racism, the idea or the denial of racism. Another issue, which a lot of people on the right promote, is this idea that climate change is a crock, is what Larry Elder said exactly. But the idea here is climate change has to be denied because of the harm that can be done to the economy if we try to fix climate change. And so once again, it's a promotion of the free market, and that the free market should not be constrained by concerns for the climate or the future destruction of our environment. So once again, the underlying thing that we find in this right-wing rebellion is this combination of denial, for instance, denial of climate change, but also denial of the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, desire to escape from reality. And we see this as the foundation of what Freud called the death drive, this fundamental desire of humans to avoid all conflict. And one way that this is done is to basically deny the fundamental conflict between society and the individual. So you can think of the right-wing movement as a type of suicide cult. And we see this now clearly with the reactions to COVID-19, where people are basically arguing, give me liberty, don't force me to wear masks or social distance or get vaccinated. And here the connection is made clear between freedom and death or suicide. The fact that people are willing to sacrifice their lives and the lives of others in order to defend their right to total freedom and total enjoyment. And so on a fundamental level, we see how self-interest can lead to self-destruction. And this is most apparent when we look at addictions, for instance, that addictions show that the pursuit of pleasure can end up in self-destruction and death. So Larry Elder also opposes gun control, and not only does he oppose minimum wage and believe that climate change policies are not worth the cost, but he has attacked Roe v. Wade, and he has dismissed the gender gaps, wage gaps, and he argues that the problem for African Americans and other people of color is not their poverty or discrimination, but is actually the breakup of the nuclear family, which he sees as the true cause of oppression within society. And in his book, 10 Things You Can't Say in America, he released his 10-point plan on how to save America. And part of it is abolishing the IRS, passing a national sales tax, reducing government by 80%, ending welfare and entitlements, abolishing minimum wage, and eliminating corporate taxes. So this is really, once again, is mainly centered on the tax revolt and the idea that we don't need to pay taxes because we don't need government, and we don't need government because there is no longer oppression, discrimination, or inequality. And so underlying this is this aspect of blaming the oppressed. So the notion of that Reagan presented of the welfare queen, and we have this reversal set up where basically the people who are oppressed are the oppressors, and the oppressors are seen as being oppressed. And part of this is a reversal of left-wing politics, of social movements, of minority-based movements for equal justice. And as I've said, by saying that there's no racism, you're saying that we don't need welfare, meaning we don't need to pay taxes. So this is what we can call a revolution from above. Now, in terms of the current pandemic, he said, I got the vaccine. If you want the vaccine, you should get it. If you don't want it, you shouldn't get it. And you won't be forced to by the state of California if I win. Then he added, one has a right not to wear a mask. So this is really the fundamental libertarian fantasy ideology driving the right here. We see that people are willing to risk their lives and the lives of others in order for the pure pursuit of individual freedom. And so this is just really fundamental selfishness and greed. And we see this as almost a form of social Darwinism, the idea that people should be free, and the market should be free, and speech should be free. And even if this leads to massive death and to suicide, the underlying slogan appears to be, give me liberty and give me death. So we see here as death as the logical extension of total freedom. Another thing that he said when he was supporting Donald Trump as president, a lot of his terminology is very sexist, and we see this often on talk show radio shows. A lot of them are men who just speak endlessly and who proclaim their victim status because their speech is being threatened. And by saying that Trump gave the Republicans balls, he shows this kind of sexist underlying force within the Republican ideology. So my ultimate message is people in California, they need to vote no to the recall. And we have to really change the system where a small number of people can decide the fate of the largest state.